Okay, students, now we're going to start a pretty large body of information, which are relating to the Greeks. So I've actually taken the Greeks and I separated the PowerPoint into two. The first one here, part one, is more about architecture, sculpture, the subjects, lifestyle, whereas the second one, part two, is the philosophers, which is pretty extensive, like I said. Socrates, Plato, those guys. Okay, so let's get started. Now, first thing I did was I wanted to put this little diagram up because, as you can see, you know some of these artifacts because there is a ziggurat, there are the pyramids, and we're going here with the Greeks, and Romans are over there. Now, this also includes an early Indian civilization in India there. We're looking at some Chinese, Japanese. So this just is to show you, you know some icons already, and you know what their names are. And that if you look at the timeline, the Sumerians, the ziggurat, and is around, that's around 3500. Pyramids a little later, 3100. And then we're moving towards the Greeks. Then we're going to go to the Romans. So I just like to show you that to say, oh, you can say, oh, I know what that is. Now, this actually is very important because if you look at this, you should be able to identify one of the statues. I'm assuming it's not the one on the right because this fella is what we call undraped. We don't say naked, we say undraped. Yes, the undraped figure. Now, and these are life size. So there's Pharaoh and his queen, Mycerinus. That is obviously Egyptian. Again, what is important is that you understand that Egypt influenced the Greeks in many, many ways. Look at that. That is the early Greek sculpture in the Archaic period. It looks exactly like Egypt. Formal, latent movement, left foot forward, clenched fist. This doesn't have a skirt on. Well, the subject is called kouros. It symbolizes male youth. And then the females, they're wearing a dress, are kura. So the only thing different is this figure is undraped. And then you have to say, well, why? And that tells you everything about the civilization because the Greeks were about the total person, mind, the athlete, the body, living simply. And it is the earliest celebration of what it means to be human in its entirety. So that's the direction it's going. And they're studying, realism. They're studying anatomy. Now, this is just to show you how this works. Now, there is Archaic Greek here. And then the next phase, which is the classical, is here. This is very important. First of all, this is a spear bearer. He's an athlete. His spear is missing because it was wooden and it rotted. But look at the stance. This is where I was trying to get you. This is informal. It is not formal here. It is informal. We call that relaxed because of the S-curve of the spine. All these ancient sculptures are formal. And they also had stone right there. These are carved marble. So this piece right here, that's to support the legs. That's what that's for, because that's a lot of marble, life size, to support something on two ankles. And this is to support the arm. This is why there's so many broken pieces, because the arms are, we're out in space and they're broken. So this is the classical where we're going. This is a very important period. This classical period is when you Plato and Aristotle. Now you see this sculpture? This is 1500. This is like more than 1500 years after this. This is like 1800 years. This is by Michelangelo. Oh, I didn't put the name. This is Michelangelo's David. Now, does the spear bearer and this sculpture, this is actually larger than life size, does that look similar? Yes. The subject, this is religious. This is David of David and Goliath. Why is David standing there undraped, slingshot over his shoulder, looking all Greek? It's because the Renaissance, after a long medieval period, 1,000 years without an undraped figure, the Renaissance, our course does not go there, is about the rebirth of the humanities, and they study the Greeks. And just mix it with religion, because the Renaissance is a very religious period. So that shows you how what you are learning is not separate. We started way far back. Here you've got this Egyptian stance, but now it's Greek, and it goes all the way to the Renaissance, and is still being a style today. It's called the classical style, classical Greek style. All right, we'll talk about that more later. Sorry for the crappy map, but this is what we already talked about. So this is the Cycladic Islands right there. There's Crete, the Minoans. We already talked about that. Sort of vanished. Something happened. Tsunami, earthquake. This supposedly is Atlantis, but that's not the story. And then here you go up into where the Greeks were, starting with the Mycenaeans. Here the Mediterranean Sea, this is the Aegean Sea, and over here is the ancient Near East. So these folks, look, they're going back and forth, okay? They are influencing each other. Cultures, civilizations do not occur in isolation. So we had early globalization going on way back. It's nothing really new. So we already talked about this. I don't want to spend much time. These are the Mycenaeans, and they're going to be conquered because of the kings by the barbarians, leveled, and they've got to come back and build a civilization. So that's called their Dark Ages, between 1100 and 800, the Minoans. Oscillation, poverty, you know, they were leveled. Now, this is some, and I'm not going to read all of these words because you can do that on your own. But when I just want to tell you what I think as the bigger, larger picture. When I think of the Greeks, it's about the rationale, democracy. They developed democracy, simplicity. They lived very simply. They ate very simply. Everything in moderation. And their art and literature reflects that. You do have different cities like Sparta and Athens. Athens was democracy. Sparta is oligarchy, which means ruled by the few. Okay, does that sound familiar? Yeah, and reason is more, what's happened, they're going to move towards reasoning. Okay, Socrates. It's not what you know, it's what you don't know that you should strive for. So this is what the Greeks are going to become. As compared to the East, ancient Near East, they stayed more mystical, ruled by kings, and that's just the way it went, for whatever reason. Now, this is a little confusing because that's a lot of data. So here is the Cycladic Islands right there. I'm just showing you the years because I think you need to put sort of this, I'm not saying know the year, but I think you need to know sort of something in time. Like when I think Sumerians, you know, I'm off by maybe 500 years. I think around, you know, say 2,500. When I think of the caves of Lascaux, that's around 15,000 BC. When I think of Venus of Willendorf, she's 30,000 BC. So this is where we are with the Greek civilization here. And these are 4 periods. The classical and Hellenistic are very important. And then they're conquered by the Romans. Okay? So this is what we're looking at right here. And you notice here also 100 BC what we're getting close to. Okay? Yeah. All right. So that's where we're going. And some very important information about sculpture and architecture that affects us. So these next slides are more just text comparing Athens to Sparta. So in general, that's the population. You take time to read this. When I think of Athens, I think of the democracy ruled by the many versus, which is what we're supposed to be doing, versus Sparta, which was an oligarchy ruled by the few. And in Sparta, that's where the women were warriors. The women were fighters, just like the men. And of course, there's many movies that are about this. So when I think of Athens, well, what is it? You know, you need to be a citizen. This idea of citizenship became very important. And the philosophy of community service is going to become important. And to fulfill your potential, of course, you need to be a free male, not a woman or a slave. You needed to participate in politics. So that tells you it's about 35 to 40,000 in the 5th century. I don't know how they got that, but. So how do you become a citizen? Greeks, a citizen. It's been one day's walking distance. Okay. So that's the difference between the two cities, two well-known cities. Women, you know, I'm always interested in women because I am a woman, and I think of the Code of Hammurabi and how, you know, it was very strict. But there were some legal rights that women had to protect themselves and children that happened many, many, many years ago, which is a good thing. So as you can see by this, the Greek women in Athens, not in Sparta, it was different. Here, you're a gal, you're a girl, you're usually married off at 15 to a man twice your age. You know, you don't dine with your husband. You're sort of like, well, you can think about what it is. No formal education, and your husband rules over you, and you're sort of his ward, and you don't participate in governing or philosophy. So actually, you know, you just stay home and cook and bear children, take care of the house. Actually, it was the prostitutes in Athens who would go to the center of the city, who were educated because they were not staying at home. They were with the citizens talking about what was going on. Mm-hmm. So this is going to become important later as well when we have Aristotle, who says that women are failed males. Yeah. Okay. So still many gods, a lot of Greek gods, but their gods were like comprehensible. I mean, they pictured them, they made sculptures of them, and that they were involved in activity and they would set up problems for us. So that was part of also, you know, what was that you could see in their plays that we'll talk about. Also, you've got a pre-scientific mind here that's coming about that you'll see a little bit later, but they don't believe in free will because the gods just play with us at will, and you will see that as well in the theater, which we're going to cover because it's very important. So, and I like to briefly just, you know, reference a creation theory because everyone has one. And here is the Greek, is that, you know, the universe just was created from chaos. And that the first being sprung forth from earth, Gaia, and heaven, Uranus. And of course, the children were the Titans. The first children were the Titans, are the first gods. And, you know, everybody lived on Mount Olympus. So here you've got Zeus. You've heard of Zeus. He's Lord of the heavens. And here you've got all these different gods. And of course, this story, how Zeus gets disposed. So there you go. As I said this whole time, look at the artifact. What is the subject? What does it communicate? And it tells you about that culture. Now, this is the earliest period. The Mycenaeans were destroyed. They come back and rebuild this civilization, and you have to start from scratch. And so the earliest, and this is the geometric period. It's named after that because this urn, there's geometric patterns on here, okay? And this is ceramics, which is actually very significant because you can store grain in it. And it's even significant today, not just because fine china is made from porcelain, a clay body, or your terracotta clay pots, but, you know, ceramics is a very important material. It's made out of the clay body as silica, and silica covers the Earth's crust. And clay ceramics is what goes up in the spaceships and the rockets because it's lined, because it can hold that heat without just exploding. So clay actually is still very important. It's actually very important because these storage jars would like be, you know, 4 or 5 feet tall. Same thing, they were using the ziggurat to store grain. So ceramics is still very important. Now you don't have a lot of architecture. This is that early period, geometric. They're coming back after Mycenaeans were conquered. They have little teeny sculptures that are very abstract. They look sort of like this image right here, little stick figures. That's about it. It's not until the archaic means old, period with Kouros that Greek civilization is really coming together. When you see early architecture, that's very crude, but you have it. Now, this is what I did. On the left side, on some of these slides, this is the vocabulary that you learned already in yellow. This is the new vocabulary in green that's on your sheet. So what I did was I just cut and pasted, and then I did strike-throughs, which are not really important, and left those that are the most important without the strike-through. You need to learn that vocabulary, so I did this. I was in a good mood. Now, let me just say this. Any of those words can be used. Well, no. You can't say this is two-dimensional because it's a three-dimensional sculpture. You cannot say two-dimensional. But although I've struck out the word, let's see, shape or line. Okay. It's definitely not planular, although you could find plane here on the base. What I'm saying is I could, as an artist, talk about some linear elements. You can always find an example of this, some of these terms, but the words that we use are those terms that are emphasized. For example, that does have color, but see, I struck it out. It does have color, but it's just the color of the stone. Color is not used in the way it is in modern or contemporary to express an idea. That's why. Color is just the material. There are other things that are most important. So color is there, but I'm not going to emphasize color because there's other things. So I just wanted to clarify that. This archaic period. And up top here, I'm showing you, okay, here is how it goes in history. So it's highlighted and also the year. So here's really the beginning of the Greek culture because now you're setting up some city-state politics. Does that sound familiar? Thank you, Sumerians. The government is democracy. Yeah, democracy. You have freestanding sculpture, like the Kouros. And then you have these first ideas about the universe. It's pre-scientific. You've got some early drama taking place, and we already know their gods are comprehensible, and they've got some early architecture with Doric columns. So that's an example. You also have here, if you look very closely, this sort of crimped, repeating pattern. Here you have repetition in the hair. That's very ancient Near East, okay? So the undraped figure is the most obvious, and now you know why. I don't need to, let's just say this. Because some of you are going to say, well, what about the genitalia? Let's just go there. You know, why is the genitalia so diminished? Well, that wasn't what this work was about, okay? That doesn't mean that's realism. That just means it's not important. It's not the focus, okay? May as well go there. Now, this is where it's very, very important. And you need to know some of these terms because this is classical Greek. This is when you have Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, very important philosophers, a lot of advances in math, and we're going to talk about that next video. So, the subject in the archaic, which we just were predominantly male, female. They were everywhere. Just remind them of their humanity, okay? Just youth. Now, youth was actually very important, and I should note that people didn't live a long time as well. What I think Alexander the Great died in his early 30s. I mean, you actually peaked about 21, 22. If young girls are being married at 14 to old geezers, you know, certainly people live quite a long time, but certainly not the lifetime now that we live. So you continue in the classical period with the chorus, but you also have subjects that are athletes and warriors, gods and goddesses, always gods and goddesses. So as I said, this is very important because here is what we're going to talk about, this stance. The spear is missing. Spear bearer, he's a warrior, and he's cut, okay? Very limited subjects, limited to this. Not a lot of variety, and there's a reason for that too. This is an important page. This is what still influences us today and influences art in ways that are bad. Talk about that in a minute. So the Greeks are very important because they established, you know, the idea of democracy and humanism and philosophy. And this spear bearer demonstrates some very important principles. They're studying anatomy. This is what we call an open form. It is not formal. It is an open form, and it is informal. And so I've highlighted these because these are some of your new words. It's an open form, meaning it's not like, you know, that space there, negative space, volume there. Like I said, these parts are out in space, and that's how they get broken off. That's why we've got so many statues that are broken parts, if they weren't churned up to use as gunpowder. Marble, yeah. So if you're thinking about, this is real simple, the classical. If you're thinking about what it means to be human, you want to think about pleasant things. What does it mean to have balance? So that's very important to them. And so this fella, they're thinking about proportions. And so they say, and we even use it today when we're in figure drawing class, the students generally say, you know, just this is a general rule of thumb. Obviously, people are all different. Say 8.5 heads. This is 8.5 heads in lengths. Okay, if you're short-waisted, if you're long-waisted, okay, I know that. But this is just general. So this becomes important. Now, why is it informal? Why isn't it standing there in that formal stance? Is because they understand anatomy, and our spine is an S curve, and this is like, you know, at ease. And because of our spine, we stand like this. We put the weight on one leg, and then we bend this leg. So it's actually called the S curve of the spine. You see that there. It's called contrapposto. Posture means posto. Contra is opposite. And so this is the pelvis area going that way, in that direction. The shoulders go in the opposite direction. Up, that goes down. That's contra, opposite. So you've got a system of proportions, and this is a key word. They develop the idea of the ideal. They do something that was problematic then, but it's very problematic now because they define beauty in these ideas. This is restrained. The last phase, Hellenistic, will be the opposite of all of this, okay? So this word conceptual, I have to explain that to you. But I'm going to explain it when we look at the Hellenistic because that's emotional, highly emotional. This is conceptual. This is all about ideas. Ideas. The way the figure stands. This idea about perfection or beauty. The ideal. Okay? All right. So maybe you think, well, you know, you certainly wouldn't want me to tell you what beauty is. They define beauty. It's called aesthetics. You wouldn't want me telling you, excuse me, let me have a sip. You wouldn't want me to tell you what beauty was. I wouldn't want you to tell me. So you may think, well, okay, we're way past the Greeks, right? We don't do that anymore. Really? Really? What do you think all those magazines are about? What do you think those runways are about? What do you think beauty pageants are about? It's the same thing. Okay? All right. So let's take the words. So I'm saying here that, well, the subject obviously is spirit bearer. It is three-dimensional. These are not, it's there, but it's not important. Mass is important. That's mass. Plane, not so much. Lines, not so much. Although in sculpture, line is the edge. I'm not going to go there. Balance is important to the Greeks. Balance. Because when you think of the ideal, you have to use the word balance. So the balance is in the proportions. Proportion. The emphasis, well, you know, there's a lot of different ways to look at emphasis. Well, you could say the emphasis is about balance. The emphasis is about proportions. The emphasis is informal. So you see these words, it doesn't mean just one thing when we use this vocabulary. That is the crux. Are the key to understanding the ideal. It's about defining beauty. And beauty is restraint, simplicity, harmony, balance. And this is conceptual. The idea that these are what beauty should be. Now, I don't know if they're that far off it, because if you want to be, if you want to have a beautiful day, you don't want to be, you know, you don't want a lot of confusion. You don't want to be in a car wreck. You don't want to be, you know, in just some horrible day. You want it to have some balance and some simplicity and harmony, right? Architecture. Now, this actually is very, very important because this is what's left of the Parthenon, which is a temple. And I'm going to use these words now, the vocabulary, because this is repetition. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Negative, that volume is important. The spacing is important. The balance is symmetrical. The proportion is very important because this space to that, everything is about balance. Okay? I also didn't take plane out because this is sort of planular, this frieze. Notice I left line in. Line, you know, these columns are lines as well. So I left line in there. Okay? You do have the lines, the flutes, and the columns, but this is a linear element, and that's why I left it. And this is in Athens. They have, like, you know, in front of it, it's beautifully lit, and they have big concerts. So there is a vocabulary here that you could use today when you look at our Capitol building, or maybe a large house or a large mansion who have columns. Thank you, Greeks. First of all, if you have a little porch, see, this is a triangular shape right up here that's gone, which is the end of the roof line. That's called a pediment. The triangular shape at the end of a roof line is called a pediment right here. A triangle is a very stable shape. So why wouldn't they use a triangle? It's about balance. Cornice is this overhang right here, right there. A cornice is an overhang. And you're going to see it in other architecture like the Romans. So this is the column, and it has three parts. You have the capital at the top, you have the shaft, and then you have the base right here. These are flutes. This column, here's a piece, these are the carved out sections. It's called flutes. And the number of flutes is determined by the diameter of the column. Everything was mathematically formulated to create a sense of harmony and balance visually. Entasis is this. See, you see this column is a little thicker at the bottom and thinner up there. That's to create a sense of weight, like this weight on the column. It's not like that. So if you had some PVC pipe there, which is totally the same width, it looks very mechanical. So this is part of the aesthetics. Aesthetics means beauty. The frieze is this carved repetition up here. Oftentimes, if you go to Washington, there's friezes everywhere. A frieze is any decorative running band. It's not a mural. A mural is a painting on a wall, two-dimensional painting. A frieze is a sculptural, a relief sculpture. And a piaster is a half column. Don't worry about that, but this is important. This construction is post and lintel, and that means this is the post, that's the lintel, that's the framing of a house today with 2x4s, and that just means use of gravity. This on top of this lintel, on top of this post, gravity pushing down. That's going to be important later. The subject is a temple. Texture, that's not really important. Color's not important. I didn't do this right. What's important is, I didn't do this at all. What's important is shape, emphasis of balance, proportion, balance, and the subject. That's what's important here, okay? Sorry, I didn't do that correctly. The balance of that, the symmetry, the repeat, the order. So, there you go. Here's the White House. So all this architecture that you see, it's just what I explained. There's the pediment. There's the cornice. This is looks like this capital looks like Ionic. I'm not sure. There you go. It's just on this Greek temple on the front of this structure. Here's a cornice. Okay. So that's why you need to know this, and I think you should learn some of the terms because you should just know them. Okay. Now, this is just, certainly not all these words, but this is there's three types of capitals. The simplest is the flat one, like this. You'll see on mansions, or if you just right around Fable, and you'll see these. This is like Ionic. I call it like two eyes, sort of, in the top. That's the Ionic. And then this later is the Corinthian, which is leafy. So you see it gets more decorative. This is like greens, leafy vegetables, and very decorative. Okay? All right. Now, I'm going back to this to show you that's important. And you can explain this. You can explain what the subject is, why it's important. If it's going to be the ideal, it's going to be someone that's athletic here. Okay? Yeah. And then Michelangelo in the 1500s. Oh, good, I have his name. So here is a very similar statue, but this is, as I said, this is David and Goliath. Students, we repeat. I haven't done Hellenistic. Repeat this stylistically in art for 500 years. Okay? The classical Greek is the Renaissance. The Hellenistic Greek is the Baroque. Neoclassical is the neoclassical period in our history, is our European history is classical Greek. The Romantic period is Hellenistic. Okay? Here's Hellenistic. Yeah. Who doesn't love Hellenistic? Classical, Hellenistic. This is the end. This is the end. And this has movement. This is restrained. This is diagonals. This is action. This is drama. This is restraint. There's no drama. He's barely moving. There's nothing happening like this. This is Laocoon. This tells you everything about how the final period of the Greeks, since they become very international, and the subjects are many. Here, with the classical, very limited athletes, warriors, kouros, koura, gods and goddesses. Here, everything, and I'll show you that. Strong. Everything that this classical is, this is the opposite. That's important. You understand by comparing, okay? So, here we go. Dramatic subjects. This is actually a fellow, Laocoon, and his sons that are being consumed by this big snake. This is actually a story from the Trojan War. But notice he's still pretty good shape. That's because the Greek statues continue to be idealized. And we're going to continue with that. It's very important. So here you have action, drama. Now this vocabulary here, I think I got this right. Repetition, well, there's a lot of different types of repetition. Repeating 3 different human figures. You see this implicit line? That is this. You see there's an imaginary directional line that runs through that. That is compositional. I mean, I just, I want to bring that up. You don't have to know that, but lines can be implicit and it leads you, just like this snake is actually a line that artists use. We use that to create balance and interest. Still very proportionate, very important. Rhythm is actually a result of this snake. It's like this moving, you feel this movement. Mass is very important, plain not so much. And yeah, so you see how that works. Good. So here's Laocoon. Look at this. This is 1600. This is the Baroque period in Europe. This is David by Bernini, 1600s, because the Baroque period copied the Hellenistic. The Renaissance copied the classical Greek. Just the subject's different. It's that simple. Yep. So there he is. There's David. He's got some little... Since the Baroque period, and as well as the Hellenistic, it's known for movement. So you've got all this drapery flying around that they also have during the Hellenistic period. Look at that face. Like he is determined. The drama. The action of that figure, okay, that implicit line going up. And then this actually is an implicit line that artists use to bring your eye here to here, so you continue to move around the figure. This is, I like comparisons. So here's the comparison chart, but it's backwards. That should be classical over there. Classical, no drama, restrained, limited subjects, contrapposto. It's about, the ideal. Hellenistic, drama, action, diagonal, very emotional, and a lot of subjects. Greece at this time became very, very, very global. People from all over the world, because of the trade routes, okay? And then they're conquered by the Romans. Darn Romans. I want to show you these sculptures because they are Hellenistic and they are beautiful. So this is here's a story. This is Gaul, who is a warrior, and he's been away at war, and so he comes back and finds his wife dead. So what does he do? He's going to take his life. Whoop. There you go. But notice he's taking his life, but it is idealized. This beautiful statue of a dying Gaul, a dying warrior, is very realistic. So here he's got like a rope around his neck where he was pulled along, enslaved, or whatever. And then he's got a slash here. It's a little difficult to see. And he's dying. And there's like 3 drops of blood that's carved on the surface. So the Hellenistic is still dramatic, the drama of dying, but it's still idealized. Because, you know, we're used to horror movies, arms being chopped off, heads chopped off, the images we see. You would never see that with the Greeks in their sculptures. No. So here's a beggar woman, and that just means to show you, look, Dad, poor people, like all civilizations, and you would never see this subject in the classical, ever. Hellenistic, anything goes. This is Winged Victory. Her name is Nike of Samothrace. Nike shoes were named after this sculpture because the earliest Nike symbol was a little red wing. That was a long time ago. And then it became what it is today, swoosh. This is a huge statue, by the way. This is Winged Victory, also known as Nike or Nike of Samothrace. Samothrace is where she was discovered. And she's lost her head because things happen and it got broken. But it's very, very large. And you see the action and drama of the Hellenistic, the wind lifting up her wings, the drapery is flowing. That's Hellenistic. And your shoes are related to that. That's the truth. Now I'm going to close after I have a sip. The amazing Alexander, you've seen the movie, has traveled all the way into Persia. The Syrians. He doesn't ever totally, well, unlike with Persia, because the Persians the Persians conquered the Assyrians. You knew who they are. And, you know, he never totally conquers the Persians, but he makes a pretty big dent. And, of course, all his men are marrying these people from other lands, and everybody's mad about it. You know, they don't really want, people don't want to be multicultural. But that's sort of the beginning, another example of how we really were global. All these people are coming back with wives and now children, and with Alexander. And also our Greek soldiers remained in the ancient Near East. They didn't come back, you know. You've got all these trade routes. So the Hellenistic Greek period is really defined by a shift in globalism and trade routes, where the classical, they were isolated more, or now I would say more isolated, okay? That's what happens. Now, if it's the last slide and it cuts off, sorry, I don't think it is.